Have you ever witnessed a moment so charged with injustice that it felt like the air itself was on fire? Picture this. A confident black woman, Ebony Jackson, steps into Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport holding a valid first-class ticket. She's poised, successful, and excited to take a well-deserved trip. But in the blink of an eye, the mood shifts. An airline staff member, eyes cold with prejudice, denies her that seat. The tension crackles. Ebony stands firm, prepared to fight for what's rightfully hers. Little does everyone know her husband is about to arrive with 30 imposing bodyguards ready to unleash a tidal wave of retribution. It was just after dawn when Ebony Jackson's alarm buzzed in her penthouse apartment overlooking Atlanta's skyline. She awakened to a crisp, clear day, one of those mornings that promised good fortune. The warm light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows as she slid out of bed, feeling both excitement and a light tingle of nerves for her upcoming flight to Los Angeles. Dressed in a sleek navy blue blazer and matching trousers, Ebony admired herself briefly in the mirror, reflecting on how far she had come. Born and raised in a humble neighborhood in Atlanta, Ebony was no stranger to adversity. She had faced discrimination, financial struggles, and personal heartbreak, but she always fought her way towards success. Now a recognized advocate for children's education and an entrepreneur in the tech world, Ebony was headed to LA to speak at a fundraising conference aimed at bridging the digital divide in underserved communities. She glanced at her watch, 6:15 a.m. Her flight didn't leave until 9:30. But Ebony was no fan of last-minute rushes. Besides, traveling in first class still gave her that buzz of pride. She had earned this comfort through countless hours of hard work. She called for the car to pick her up, her heart full of anticipation for what lay ahead. Upon entering Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, a bustling epicenter of domestic and international travel, Ebony inhaled the whirl of coffee aromas and the hum of rolling suitcases. She loved the energy of airports, the convergence of so many stories, destinations, and dreams. Navigating the crowd with casual grace, she made a beeline for the Delta Airlines check-in counter, a real and reputable name that symbolized progress and possibility, especially with its Atlanta roots. This was far from Ebony's first time traveling first class. In fact, her new position as co-CEO of a thriving tech startup often demanded it. Yet she never lost that small spark of wonder each time she saw her boarding pass reading seat 2A or 3B. For her first class wasn't just a luxury, it was a symbol of how hard work and determination could reshape a person's life. She approached the counter, received a polite smile from the agent there, and confirmed her reservation. Tucking the boarding pass carefully into her blazer pocket, Ebony felt her phone buzz. A text message from the event organizer in LA read, "Safe travels. So excited to have you speak today." Ebony smiled, replying with a quick, "On my way." Then she headed towards security, feeling optimistic for what she believed would be a routine journey. Security checks at Hartsfield-Jackson were typically lengthy but predictable. Ebony breezed through, answering standard questions and passing every check without a hitch. After collecting her laptop and shoes from the bins, she slid her luggage handle out and made her way to the departure gate. Her gate was near the far end of Concourse B, an area she knew well from previous business trips. She found a seat near a charging station, careful to keep her phone's battery topped up. Ebony took note of the gate agent on duty, a middle-aged woman with stern features, pinned-back hair, and a posture that seemed perpetually stiff. The woman's name tag read, Ms. Townsend. Ebony couldn't help but notice Ms. Townsend giving her an odd glance now and again. At first, Ebony brushed it off as harmless, Or perhaps the agent was just having a tough morning. But the disapproving looks continued an unspoken tension that Ebony tried to dismiss. She occupied herself with reviewing her speech for the conference, reading the highlights she planned to emphasize about educational reform and digital tools for marginalized youth. Every once in a while, Ebony's eyes drifted up to Ms. Townsend, who would shoot another grim look her way. Ebony decided not to let it rattle her. She had a plane to catch and a stage to speak on, nothing more, nothing less. Boarding began right on schedule. The gate agent's voice crackled over the loudspeaker. "We will now begin boarding for Delta Flight 22789 to Los Angeles. First-class passengers and SkyMiles Diamond Medallion members may board first." Ebony stood, smiled at an elderly couple who let her pass, and approached the boarding lane marked Sky Priority. The tension she had felt from Ms. Townsend's glaring stares lingered in the air, but Ebony kept her composure. Presenting her boarding pass, she offered a polite "good morning," hoping to set a cordial tone. Ms. Townsend, however, did not reciprocate. With a frown, she scanned the pass and pursed her lips. "Ma'am, you need to step aside," she said brusquely. Confusion flashed across Ebony's face. "Is there an issue with my seat?" she asked, voice calm but uncertain. Ms. Townsend narrowed her eyes. "This ticket, it's not valid for first class. I see that you must have made a mistake. You'll have to go to the main boarding line or see the service desk." For a second, Ebony thought she might have pulled the wrong ticket. She double-checked her pass, clearly marked First Class Seat 2C. Her heart gave a tiny jolt, but she kept her tone even. "I'm sorry, but my ticket is correct. Please step aside," Miss Townsend repeated, crossing her arms over her chest. Ebony stepped out of the boarding lane, trying to keep her cool. She didn't want to jump to conclusions. Could it be an honest system glitch? An error in ticketing? In her experience, these mix-ups sometimes happened, though rarely with such hostility. Swallowing her frustration, she moved to the nearby service desk. Another airline representative, a younger man named Marcus, greeted her. "Ma'am, may I help you?" "Hi, Ebony," said her voice, steady. "There seems to be a confusion about my first-class ticket. The gate agent told me it isn't valid, but I have this boarding pass." "Can you confirm my seat, please?" Marcus typed swiftly on his computer, occasionally squinting at the screen. Ebony noticed the furrow in his brow. He turned to her, expression apologetic. "I see a first-class seat booked under your name. Everything checks out." Not sure why Miss Townsend would say otherwise. Relief mixed with annoyance swept over Ebony. "I'd appreciate your help in clearing it up so I can board." Marcus nodded. "Let me walk you back to the gate and clarify this. I'm not sure if there was a technical glitch with the scanner or what, but I'll straighten it out." Ebony followed Marcus, bracing herself. She hoped Ms. Townsend's odd attitude was just a misunderstanding that would quickly be resolved. Little did she know, this would be only the beginning of a much larger storm. Returning to the gate, Ebony stood beside Marcus as he politely addressed Ms. Townsend. "I've confirmed her booking, Ms. Townsend. Her seat in first class is indeed valid," he explained, sliding a small printout across the desk, presumably a recheck of Ebony's ticket reservation. Ms. Townsend barely glanced at it. Instead, she snapped, "I already told her there's an issue. We have an oversold situation in first class, and the computer must have auto-assigned her. She doesn't have the correct fare type." Ebony felt her pulse quicken. "Oversold or not, if I booked and paid for a first-class seat, I have a right to it," she said firmly, trying to keep her temper in check. Ms. Townsend's lips curled in a thin smile that dripped with condescension. "I don't believe that seat was meant for you. Let's not make a scene. You need to step aside so the other passengers can board." Heat flared in Ebony's cheeks. This was more than a misunderstanding. This was outright dismissal. She glanced at Marcus, who appeared just as perplexed. A small line of other travelers was forming, some eyes darting with curiosity. Ebony recognized the looks, people uneasy about a potential confrontation, yet possibly suspecting the interaction had a racial undertone. Determined not to be bullied, Ebony took a deep breath, mentally preparing for what she had to do next. Ebony's hands trembled slightly, but she held firm. Internally, she replayed every time she'd had to defend herself from classroom debates in college where professors underestimated her to board meetings where her ideas were sidelined. It was exhausting, but necessary. Once more, she was placed in a position to prove she belonged. She steeled her voice. "Ma'am, let me be clear. My ticket is valid, and I'm not giving up my seat. If the flight is oversold, your airline is responsible for reaccommodating or upgrading someone else. It won't be me." Ms. Townsend shot her a glare that would have felled a weaker spirit. "We'll see about that," she hissed, turning abruptly to her computer screen. She tapped at the keyboard with visible frustration. Marcus stepped closer to Ebony. "I'm so sorry about this, Miss Jackson. I'll escalate it to my supervisor if needed." His words offered a small solace. She wasn't entirely alone. The clock was ticking. First-class passengers were already filtering onto the plane, and Ebony's seat was literally slipping away. She could see the cabin door open, flight attendants greeting travelers. Despite the swirl of chaotic energy around her, Ebony held her ground. She hadn't come this far in life to be brushed aside by a clerk with a chip on her shoulder. Among the onlookers, Ebony sensed a mix of reactions. Some passers-by paused, uncertain. Others discreetly took out their phones, perhaps to record. Tensions in public spaces often went viral. She'd seen enough social media fiascos to guess that this confrontation might end up online. A mother with 2 children came by and offered Ebony a sympathetic smile. A businessman on his phone spared a wary glance. Still, Ebony felt a tightening in her chest as she realized just how lonely it was to stand up for yourself in moments like these. No official supervisor had materialized yet, and Ms. Townsend seemed all too happy to block Ebony's path, as if proving a point. Ebony flicked her gaze to the digital display overhead, flight 2789 to Los Angeles, boarding. She was missing her chance to settle into her seat, all because someone decided she wasn't worthy of first class. Ebony recalled a mantra she often repeated at her motivational talks: "Never yield to unwarranted authority." This was precisely such a scenario unwarranted authority used to exclude her. One woman's personal prejudice or perceived power trip was now threatening Ebony's ability to travel in dignity. But Ebony was not going to yield. She decided it was time to make a call to the one person she knew would have her back without question. Ebony stepped aside just out of Ms. Townsend's earshot and reached for her phone. Her contact list scrolled quickly under her thumb until she found the name Winston Jackson. Her husband was her rock, someone who understood the social intricacies of business and the dignity Ebony deserved. Winston Jackson was no ordinary spouse. He was a well-known philanthropist and a major investor in various industries, including fashion, real estate, and even the startup Ebony co-led. His phone rarely stopped ringing with calls from CEOs, city officials, and philanthropic organizations. Yet Ebony knew he'd answer for her. When the line connected, Ebony spoke softly but urgently. "Winston, I'm at the gate at Hartsfield. They're refusing to let me board first class, even though I have a valid ticket." Winston's voice was measured calm, but with an undercurrent of protective concern. "Are you safe? Is it just a misunderstanding?" "I wish," she replied, casting a glance at Ms. Townsend's scowling face. "It feels personal." There was a subtle pause. Winston sighed. "I'm already near the airport for a meeting. I'll be there in 15 minutes tops. Don't do anything rash. Let me handle this." Ebony hung up, feeling a strange blend of relief and apprehension. If Ms. Townsend thought Ebony was alone, she was in for a surprise. The minutes dragged on. Ms. Townsend continued to board passengers, each beep of the scanner striking Ebony's nerves like a gong. Occasionally, the agent would glance at Ebony with an icy smirk, as if relishing her stalled progress. Marcus had vanished to find a supervisor, but Ebony suspected that Ms. Townsend was stalling everyone behind the scenes. When Ebony tried to reason again, Ms. Townsend shut her down. "Stand back, miss. I'm boarding other passengers now. If you don't comply, I'll have to call security." Those words simmered in Ebony's mind. Call security. She'd heard stories of innocent black flyers or shoppers who were quickly labeled as threats. She didn't want to become another headline, yet she knew injustice demanded a response. Finally, Marcus returned with a woman wearing a managerial badge, Ms. Campbell. She approached Ebony with an apologetic expression. "Ms. Jackson, I'm so sorry for the inconvenience. Our records show a legitimate purchase of your first-class seat. I'd like to accompany you onto the plane myself." Ebony exhaled, hope rising. But Ms. Townsend bristled. "I've already cleared the seat for someone else, Ms." Campbell shot Ms. Townsend a stern glare. "That's not correct procedure. Ms. Jackson has the right to her seat. You can't just hand out seats," Ms. Townsend spat back, crossing her arms defiantly. Ebony noticed Ms. Townsend's face redden with anger at being contradicted in public. Ebony could feel the confrontation reaching a boiling point. Ms. Campbell insisted that Ebony's seat was valid. Ms. Townsend refused to budge, insisting that Ebony was not permitted in first class. Nearby passengers slowed to watch some openly filming with their phones. Then, Ebony saw a sight that both comforted and startled her. Striding through the concourse with unmistakable purpose was Winston Jackson, flanked by a small entourage of imposing individuals. He had called them in his personal security detail. Ebony counted them quickly, at least 30 strong, all tall and broad-shouldered, in matching suits, earpieces, glinting under the fluorescent lights. The crowd murmured with curiosity. Winston reached Ebony's side eyes, scanning her for any sign of distress. Finding her outwardly calm, but obviously upset, he turned his focus on Miss Campbell and Ms. Townsend. "Is there a reason my wife is being denied her seat?" he asked, voice sharp with a controlled edge. Ms. Campbell cleared her throat. "Sir, I'm Ms. Campbell, one of the supervisors here. We have confirmed Ebony's first-class seat. We are trying to rectify the situation." She made a pointed glance at Ms. Townsend. Winston's jaw set. "Then rectify it," he said quietly, but with an unmistakable authority. The circle of security guards stood behind him, an intimidating presence that seemed to make Ms. Townsend even more defensive. At the sight of Winston and his security detail, the entire gate area seemed to hold its breath. Some travelers stepped back, not wanting to be caught in the crossfire. Others leaned in, adrenaline fueled by the spectacle of a high-stakes standoff. Ms. Townsend's eyes flicked nervously from Winston to the line of bodyguards. She tried to maintain her composure, but her voice quivered with irritation and perhaps a hint of fear. "Sir, I'm simply following protocol. We're oversold in first class, and there's no seat for your wife." Winston took a measured breath, then calmly reached into his jacket pocket and produced Ebony's printed reservation and ticket receipt. "This is a fully paid, first-class fare. Unless you're implying this document is forged or invalid, you have no grounds to deny her boarding. I suggest you correct your approach." For a moment, Ms. Townsend looked like a cornered animal, unsure whether to double down or concede. Her lips trembled. I don't have the authority to Ms. Campbell cleared her throat loudly. That's enough. I am the supervisor here. Ms. Townsend, please grant Ms. Jackson immediate boarding. Ebony exchanged a brief look with Winston. She was grateful for his unwavering support, but also felt the sting that it took such an overpowering display of force to secure her basic rights. Just when it seemed the situation might resolve, a flash went off. Someone had taken a photograph. Ebony turned to see several people with smartphones raised, capturing this bizarre collision of class privilege, racial prejudice, and show of power. She grimaced inwardly. She never wanted to make a scene, but it was too late. The moment was already becoming a public spectacle. Ms. Campbell gestured for Ebony and Winston to move toward the boarding corridor. Let's go, she said gently. I'll personally escort you to your seats. But as they tried to proceed, Ms. Townsend made a final stand. I don't care who you think you are, she hissed at Ebony. You people are always trying to game the system. This time, you won't. That statement echoed across the gate area, sharp as a whip. Audible gasps erupted from bystanders. Winston's bodyguards tensed, several exchanging incredulous looks. Ebony's entire body went rigid, stunned by the blatant prejudice laid bare. Time froze for an instant, the air thick with a disbelieving hush. Winston's voice, low and shaking with controlled anger, cut through the silence. You've said enough. Ms. Campbell, we need to speak with higher management. Immediately. In moments, Ms. Campbell radioed another higher-level manager. Meanwhile, Ebony could scarcely believe the words that had left Ms. Townsend's mouth. You people are always trying to game the system. That phrase hammered against Ebony's mind, bringing forth memories of every microaggression she'd faced in corporate boardrooms, social events, or even in casual day-to-day life. A tall man, in a crisp white shirt and tie, appeared sporting the name tag Mr. Green, operations manager. He approached with an air of authority and mild exasperation, clearly aware that a major conflict was in progress. What's happening here? He asked, eyeing Ms. Townsend. Ms. Campbell quickly briefed him, summarizing Ebony's valid ticket, Miss Townsend's refusal, and the slur she'd just uttered. Mr. Green's expression darkened. That's unacceptable, he declared, turning to Ms. Townsend. You are relieved of duty while we investigate this. Miss Townsend opened her mouth as if to argue, but Mr. Green silenced her with a raised hand. Go to the staff office, now. Red-faced and trembling, Ms. Townsend stormed off, her footsteps echoing down the corridor. Mr. Green shifted toward Ebony, Winston, and the silent wall of bodyguards. I am so sorry for this ordeal, he said, voice sincere. Delta Airlines does not tolerate discrimination. Please allow me to offer you both an official apology and ensure you board immediately. With Ms. Townsend gone, the path was finally clear. Ebony felt a wave of relief, yet a nagging tension remained in her chest. This couldn't just be smoothed over with a polite apology. Nonetheless, she and Winston followed Mr. Green and Miss Campbell down the jet bridge toward the aircraft door. Winston's bodyguards stayed behind at the waiting area, forming a quiet line that passers-by gazed at with a mix of awe and nerves. Inside the plane's first-class cabin, Ebony was greeted by a flight attendant with a warm smile. Welcome aboard, Ms. Jackson. The attendant's tone was professional, though Ebony could see a flicker of concern in her eyes, perhaps from hearing about the commotion at the gate. Ebony took her seat, 2C, exactly as her boarding pass specified. Winston sat beside her in 2D. He'd managed to book a seat on the same flight last minute, thanks to his connections. She placed her carry-on overhead, exhaling deeply. As the boarding process completed, Ebony tried to settle into the plush leather seat, yet the tension still sizzled beneath her surface. A swirl of emotions clashed inside her: relief, anger, embarrassment, and a fierce sense of having to fight for every inch of her rightful space in this world. Only the hum of the plane's engines offered any semblance of calm. Once the plane soared through thick white clouds and leveled off, Ebony finally started to breathe a bit easier. A flight attendant served her a glass of freshly squeezed orange juice, which she sipped slowly. Winston placed a reassuring hand over hers, his gaze gentle but concerned. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly, leaning in to avoid eavesdropping from other first-class passengers. Ebony nodded, though tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. She took another moment before responding. I'm upset. We shouldn't have to deal with that kind of blatant racism. Especially not after paying for a first-class ticket." Winston squeezed her hand. "We'll address it. And trust me, I'm not letting this slide." She offered a grateful smile, feeling love surge for the man who always had her back. "I know, but part of me is just exhausted. Why does it take a scene, 30 guards, a manager, and the threat of lawsuits just for them to do the right thing?" Winston breathed out slowly. "We'll make sure the airline takes this seriously. For now, focus on your talk in LA. The kids are counting on you." Ebony closed her eyes, trying to shift her energy from the humiliating altercation to the mission ahead. But she knew she wouldn't let this moment fade without consequences. The plane cut across the country, leaving Atlanta's sprawl behind and venturing over mountains, plains, and deserts. Ebony tried to rest, but her mind kept drifting back to Ms. Townsend's words. "You people are always trying to game the system." The phrase took up unwelcome space in Ebony's head. She remembered with painful clarity all the times she'd worked 3 jobs just to put herself through college. She recalled countless weekends spent coding and perfecting pitch decks for investors. Every success she and Winston had earned was the result of relentless effort, not gaming anything. At times, Ebony wondered if Ms. Townsend's prejudice was rooted in envy, ignorance, or a deeper ideology. Whatever the cause, Ebony felt resolved to take action. She scrolled through her phone, drafting a message to her legal advisor, Ms. Winthrop. She explained the situation briefly, unsure of how far she wanted to escalate matters, but certain she wanted it documented. Winston, noticing her busy with her phone, murmured, "We'll handle it. Do what you need to do." He then folded his arms, leaning back into his seat. Even with his eyes closed, Ebony sensed his protective stance hadn't diminished in the least. The flight's final announcements crackled overhead. "We'll begin our descent into Los Angeles shortly. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." Ebony put away her phone, bracing herself for the next phase of her journey and the looming confrontation that awaited them both upon landing. LAX greeted them with its usual chaos: traffic jams of airplanes on the tarmac, lines of weary travelers at baggage claim, and the swirl of palm trees framed by hazy sunshine. Ebony and Winston collected their luggage and headed toward the arrival hall, where a chauffeur held a sign for Mr. and Mrs. Jackson. As they were guided to a sleek black SUV, Ebony's phone buzzed. A local news reporter wanted a statement about the airport altercation. Ebony's brow creased. Word had spread faster than she anticipated. Then came another buzz, this time from Ms. Winthrop, her legal advisor. "Hi, Ebony," Ms. Winthrop said when Ebony answered. "I'm sorry to hear about what happened. Do you have a moment to fill me in on the details?" "On the drive," Ebony replied, glancing at Winston, who gave a nod of approval. They slid into the back seat of the SUV, Ebony launching into a summary of events for Ms. Winthrop's records. She mentioned Ms. Townsend's name, the presence of Winston's bodyguards, the manager's apology, and the hateful remark heard by a crowd of travelers. When the call ended, Ebony sighed, leaning her head against the seat. She had just survived one trial, but dealing with the aftermath publicly and legally might be an even taller mountain to climb. Time refused to slow down for Ebony. Upon arriving at the upscale hotel, there was barely a moment to change clothes before she had to rush to the conference venue. Held at a chic downtown location with modern architecture and vibrant murals, the conference was a gathering of philanthropic leaders, tech innovators, and educational activists. Cameras flashed, people chatted in the corridors, and the energy buzzed with optimism. Yet Ebony found it difficult to match that optimism. The morning's ordeal clung to her mood. Still, she knew she had a responsibility to the young people who would benefit from the programs her speech might fund. Winston took a seat in the front row. As Ebony walked to the podium, she forced a genuine smile, focusing on the reason she was there: to inspire, to mobilize resources, and to remind everyone of the enormous potential in bridging educational gaps. Her opening lines were smooth, rehearsed, but underneath, her emotions simmered. As she spoke about resilience and opportunity, Ebony couldn't help reflecting on the brazen discrimination she'd just faced. The conference hall erupted in applause at her strong points about leveling the playing field. No one in the audience could have guessed the emotional turbulence roiling within her. Midway through her keynote, Ebony felt a sudden surge of emotion. Talking about the digital divide reminded her how prejudice could keep entire communities locked out of opportunity. It wasn't just about computers or high-speed internet. It was about respect, access, and a seat at the table, topics all too resonant given her morning's encounter. Adversity isn't just a personal challenge, Ebony said, her voice cracking slightly. It's a collective burden when entire groups of people are underestimated or locked out of the room, whether that room is a classroom, a boardroom, or an airplane cabin. The reference was subtle, but Winston caught it. She saw the supportive nod he gave from the front row. The audience, unaware of the full story, responded with fervent applause to what they perceived as a powerful analogy about access. In that moment, Ebony's tears threatened to spill over, but she held them back. Drawing a deep breath, she pressed on with her final points about the power of public-private partnerships, about how each donation could transform the lives of children across America. She ended her speech to a standing ovation. Despite the turmoil inside her, Ebony felt an undeniable sense of purpose. She would channel this day's conflict into fuel for change. A press event followed the keynote. Reporters gathered around Ebony, cameras, rolling microphones thrust forward. Most questions centered on her philanthropic goals and the success of her tech venture, but eventually the delicate subject emerged. One reporter asked, "Ms. Jackson, rumors are circulating online about a dispute you had at the Atlanta airport this morning. Could you clarify what happened?" The question hung in the air. Ebony glanced at Winston, who gave a barely perceptible nod of support. She stepped up to the microphone. "I'm aware of some footage circulating. All I can say is I was unjustly denied access to a seat I'd lawfully purchased. The matter is under review with the airline, and I'm confident it will be resolved in a fair manner." Another journalist jumped in. "Is it true your husband arrived with 30 bodyguards to address the situation?" A flicker of amusement crossed Ebony's face. "My husband is a well-known philanthropist and businessman who employs security for certain events. They happen to be there to ensure my safety, given the tension. Let's just say it was a complicated morning." Questions kept coming, each more probing, but Ebony held her composure, reiterating her stance without giving away too many details. She wanted a formal investigation to take place first, ensuring accountability was thoroughly pursued. Meanwhile, back in Atlanta, the fallout had already begun. The video clips of Ms. Townsend's refusal to board Ebony, coupled with her hateful remark, had circulated rapidly on social media. Delta Airlines' corporate office caught wind of the incident, and within hours, an internal investigation was launched. Ms. Townsend's behavior was a major liability, threatening the airline's public image and potentially violating anti-discrimination laws. In a statement to the press, a Delta representative expressed regret for any distress caused, emphasizing that the airline upholds the highest standards of inclusivity. They promised a swift and thorough examination of the incident. Privately, executives scrambled to handle the PR crisis. People across social platforms used hashtags like #HatFlyingWhileBlack and Stand with Ebony, demanding accountability. The uproar wasn't just contained to Twitter and Facebook. Advocacy groups and civil rights organizations stepped in, some calling for boycotts, until the airline demonstrated genuine reform. Ebony's phone blew up with messages of support from friends, colleagues, and even strangers who sympathized. She was thrust into a spotlight she'd never sought. As Ebony and Winston relaxed for an hour in their hotel suite, after the conference they exchanged updates, reading the flood of social media comments. Ebony felt both heartened by the support and burdened by the magnitude of the situation. Within 2 days, Ms. Winthrop confirmed that the airline had offered Ebony a formal apology and significant compensation, a round-trip first-class pass for any destination, plus a monetary settlement. But Ebony wasn't just interested in personal gain. She pressed for an official policy review, mandatory diversity training, and public disclosure of how the airline would handle future incidents. Delta, understanding the gravity of a potential lawsuit and the negative press, agreed. They also confirmed that Ms. Townsend had been terminated, citing gross misconduct and violation of company policies. Ebony's eyes widened when Ms. Winthrop relayed the news. While a part of her was relieved, another part felt pity. Prejudice sometimes was ingrained by ignorance or environment, but consequences had to follow such harmful actions. Winston hugged Ebony gently. "You stood your ground. This is what happens when justice aligns with public opinion. She earned her own downfall by refusing to treat you with basic human decency." Ebony nodded, thinking about how a single moment of bigotry might have ruined Miss Townsend's career. Yet Ebony didn't allow herself too much sympathy. Ms. Townsend's words weren't just a slip of the tongue. They were a glaring window into her worldview. And Ebony knew the only way to dismantle such attitudes was through firm accountability. After the dust settled, Ebony received a surprising email. It was from a local TV station in Atlanta, inviting her and Ms. Townsend to participate in a moderated discussion about racial biases in customer service. The proposal was unique, an opportunity for both sides to speak. Ebony's first reaction was to decline. She had no interest in more public drama. But the station insisted it could serve as a platform for broader understanding and healing. Ebony wavered. On one hand, the last thing she wanted was to stand beside Ms. Townsend again. On the other, she recognized the power such an event could have in exposing and addressing the systemic issues behind these incidents. A week later, Ebony forwarded the email to Miss Winthrop. "Should I do this?" she typed. Ms. Winthrop's response was nuanced. "Only if you feel it can further your cause without causing you emotional harm. Remember, you owe nobody a platform." Ultimately, Ebony decided to hold off. She had enough on her plate, managing her business, championing educational causes, and maintaining her well-being. Closure, she realized, doesn't always require direct confrontation. Sometimes the loudest statement was simply to rise above and continue her mission. Back in Atlanta a few days later, Ebony found her schedule packed with community events. Word of her ordeal inspired a surge in donations to her foundation, which aimed to bring coding classes and computers to low-income schools. Churches, youth centers, and corporate sponsors reached out, eager to collaborate. One weekend, Ebony hosted a community meet-and-greet at the John Lewis Invictus Academy in Atlanta, where she donated dozens of laptops. Speaking to a crowd of students and parents, she emphasized the importance of perseverance against prejudice. "We can't always prevent negative encounters," she told them, "but we can control our response. We can stand up, demand respect, and use our voices to call for change." The applause that followed bolstered her spirit. Meeting bright-eyed kids who'd only ever dreamed of owning a personal computer reaffirmed her commitment. She might have faced discrimination in first class, but she wouldn't let that overshadow the work she'd dedicated her life to. After the event, a young black girl approached Ebony. "I saw the video," she whispered shyly. "I'm sorry they were mean to you, but I'm glad you fought back." Ebony knelt down, her eyes misty, and gently squeezed the girl's hand. "We all have to fight back in our own ways," she said softly. As Ms. Winthrop guided Ebony through the process, it became clear the airline's swift action firing Miss Townsend, issuing a public apology, and instituting new training had substantially met Ebony's immediate demands. Legal recourse remained an option, but Ebony weighed the emotional toll it would exact on her. She concluded that the airline's changes and accountability were for now enough to move forward. Winston, ever vigilant, supported Ebony's decision. Taking it further could drag this out for years. "You've already secured tangible improvements and a public stand against discrimination. Maybe that's victory enough," Ebony agreed, though a small voice inside her warned that she had to remain watchful. Companies often promised reforms but failed to follow through long-term. She decided to work with other activists and organizations to keep an eye on Delta's compliance and track whether their pledge to improve truly led to lasting change. Meanwhile, Ebony's philanthropic efforts expanded. Leveraging the publicity from the incident, she partnered with major corporations to fund more technology centers in rural and inner-city schools. If something good can come of this, she thought it should be opportunity and progress for those who've suffered discrimination far worse than a single denied seat. It arrived in a plain white envelope. No return address, no logo. Just Ebony Jackson's name, written in neat cursive on the front. Her assistant had placed it in the middle of her desk without much thought, alongside business proposals, grant applications, and the usual correspondence. But something about its simplicity made Ebony pause. She opened it slowly, unfolding a single sheet of lined paper. It was a handwritten letter from Miss Townsend, the same Miss Townsend who had denied her boarding months ago, the same woman who had muttered those cutting words, "You people are always trying to game the system." Ebony's breath caught as she read the first line. "Dear Ms. Jackson, I know I am likely the last person you want to hear from, and I wouldn't blame you for discarding this letter unread, but I hope you'll give me just a few moments of your time." The letter was surprisingly raw. Ms. Townsend admitted she had been terminated, struggled to find work, and faced judgment from her community and even her own family. She didn't excuse her actions, didn't try to blame it on stress or airline policy. Instead, she acknowledged them, owned them. "The truth is, I was bitter, resentful of the world, of people who seemed to have everything I'd worked for and never reached. I didn't know how much anger I had inside me until I saw your face and chose to take it out on you. It wasn't just unprofessional, it was ugly, and it was wrong. I've since started attending racial sensitivity workshops and volunteering at a local community center in a neighborhood I used to avoid. I'm learning slowly what I should have known long ago. Ebony sat in silence for several minutes after reading it. Her emotions were conflicted: anger, sorrow, disbelief, and an unexpected twinge of empathy. People change, she thought. But how much change was genuine? Was this repentance or damage control? And yet, she believed in accountability. She also believed in growth. Later that evening, she sat at her desk again and reached for a pen. Her response was short, deliberate. Ms. Townsend, thank you for your letter. I appreciate that you took the time to write with honesty. While I cannot erase what happened, I believe everyone deserves the opportunity to grow if they are truly committed to doing better. Respect and dignity are not privileges, they are rights. I hope you continue the work you've begun. The work within. Sincerely, Ebony Jackson. She folded the note, placed it in an envelope, and sealed it. Ebony didn't offer forgiveness, not yet, but she offered something just as powerful: a mirror and a path forward. And maybe in a world too quick to cancel and too slow to understand, that was the first step towards something better. The Jackson home in Atlanta buzzed with warmth, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. Twilight painted the sky in soft streaks of purple and gold as the city exhaled beneath the glow of string lights decorating the patio. Tonight wasn't about work or speeches. It was about celebration. It was about family. Ebony and Winston had opened their home to the people who mattered most: family, close friends, longtime mentors, and trusted colleagues, to mark the launch of their new scholarship initiative aimed at supporting underrepresented youth in tech and entrepreneurship. The evening air was filled with the smell of roasted vegetables, honey-glazed chicken, and Winston's signature bourbon barbecue skewers sizzling on the outdoor grill. Conversations flowed freely from education to business to childhood stories that still made everyone laugh until their sides ached. At the head of the table sat Winston's mother, a retired schoolteacher whose presence always grounded the room. She tapped her fork gently against her glass and stood slowly, her voice carrying the weight of wisdom and deep affection. To my daughter-in-law, she said, her eyes locking with Ebony's, for turning a painful injustice into a pathway for so many others. And to my son, who stood by her side when it mattered most. You both remind us that dignity, grace, and love can outshine any moment of ignorance. A hush fell, and then applause broke out, heartfelt and thunderous. Ebony smiled, her eyes misting, as Winston leaned over and pressed a kiss to her temple. Winston's father, a typically reserved man who had built a quiet empire in logistics, cleared his throat next. Ebony, he said, lifting his glass, I may not say much, but I've watched how you've carried yourself through insult, through pressure, through public scrutiny. You've done more than endure. You've led, and I'm proud to call you my daughter. Ebony bit her bottom lip, emotions surging behind her composed exterior. These weren't public statements or polished sound bites. These were the voices of those who knew her best, who had seen the quiet tears after board meetings where she was talked over, the late nights of self-doubt, the resilience etched into every inch of her journey. Later that night, Ebony and Winston stood on the balcony of their home, arms wrapped around each other as the lights of Atlanta twinkled below. The music from inside faded into the background. Sometimes Ebony whispered, I wonder if we'll ever stop having to prove our worth. Winston held her tighter. Maybe not, but we'll keep proving something greater, that nothing, not ignorance, not bias, not injustice, can stop us from rising. She turned her head, resting it on his shoulder, the city humming beneath them. In that moment, Ebony didn't feel like someone fighting a battle. She felt like someone building a legacy, together with the man who always had her back and the family that stood beside her. And that was strength no one could take away. The morning air was cool and crisp, tinged with the smell of dew and fresh mulch. As the sun crested over Atlanta's low skyline, Ebony Jackson pulled into the parking lot of a local community center, nestled in a neighborhood often overlooked by city developers. Today was different. Today something was blooming. She stepped out of her car and paused, admiring the modest building that now housed two fully furnished computer labs that hadn't existed 3 months ago. They had been built from the surge of donations and corporate sponsorships that came flooding in after Ebony's airport ordeal went viral. The very injustice that tried to diminish her had instead become a platform for transformative impact. Inside, volunteers bustled with energy-prepping workstations and adjusting keyboards. Dozens of brand-new computers lined the tables, screens glowing in welcome. Posters featuring coding languages, digital safety tips, and empowering quotes covered the walls. One read, "Your mind is your passport. The world is your code." Ebony walked the rows, slowly nodding to volunteers and smiling at the excited children who filtered in, some still rubbing sleep from their eyes, others practically bouncing with anticipation. A young boy pointed to the glowing monitor in front of him. "I've never seen a real Mac before," he whispered to the girl beside him, who clutched her backpack like it was the most valuable thing she owned. Ebony felt her throat tighten. These children weren't just being introduced to machines, they were being given a portal into a future that had too often been gated by zip code race or economic status. Her phone buzzed in her hand with a news alert. A national outlet had just published an article highlighting her foundation's work, calling it a tech revolution, seeded by one woman's refusal to be dismissed. The article barely mentioned the airline incident. Instead, it celebrated the impact, the digital access, the scholarships, the after-school tech clubs springing up like sparks in underserved communities. This was the legacy she had always envisioned, not defined by confrontation, but by creation. She stepped outside for a moment to collect herself. Near the entrance, a small group of parents waited. One mother, holding the hand of a little girl no older than 8, approached Ebony shyly. "Ms. Jackson," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Thank you. My daughter dreams of building video games. Before today, we didn't even have Wi-Fi at home." Ebony crouched to the girl's level and smiled. "What's your name, Imani?" the girl whispered. "Well, Imani," Ebony said gently, "you can build anything you dream of, and we're here to help you get there." As the girl beamed and darted toward the computer lab, Ebony felt a rush of warmth course through her. This moment was the true reward. Not the applause, not the articles, not the settlement from the airline, but knowing that one act of standing firm had cracked open the door for hundreds more to walk through. She looked toward the rising sun, its golden light spilling over the center's roof like a benediction. The seeds had been planted, and they were beginning to grow. 3 months had passed since that unforgettable morning at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, the morning when Ebony Jackson was publicly denied what she had rightfully earned, only to stand her ground and spark change far beyond her personal experience. Now, as the sun climbed over Atlanta's skyline, Ebony and Winston strolled side by side through the same airport terminal. This time, there were no nerves, no apprehension, just purpose. They were heading to New York City for one of the country's largest tech expos, where Ebony had been invited as a keynote speaker. Her presentation, titled "From Adversity to Innovation," was already making headlines for its anticipated insights on equity in technology. Ebony clutched her first-class boarding pass, not as a symbol of status, but as a quiet reminder of what she had fought for. It was the same airline, the same class of service, but the atmosphere felt different now. Colder days had passed. At the gate, a sharply dressed airline employee greeted her with a smile that felt genuine. "Good morning, Ms. Jackson. Thank you for flying with us. Your seat is ready 2A. Let me know if there's anything I can do to make your flight more comfortable." Ebony blinked, then smiled back. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice carrying both relief and recognition. The professionalism was a stark contrast to her previous encounter. There were no smirks, no questions about legitimacy, just respect. As she boarded the plane, Winston followed closely behind, hand resting protectively on her back, as if to remind her, "You're never alone." They took their seats, and Ebony eased back into the leather headrest, allowing herself a long, slow breath. For the first time in a while, flying didn't feel like a fight. It felt like a return to peace. Her phone buzzed in her palm. A message from Miss Winthrop read, "Confirmed Delta's new training protocols are in full rollout. You made a difference." Ebony's lips curved into a thoughtful smile. The battle had been bitter, the spotlight uninvited. But this message, this outcome, was the kind of result she had always hoped for. Change wasn't instant, and it wasn't easy, but it was happening. Winston leaned over, his voice low. "You okay?" Ebony turned to him, their fingers intertwining. "Better than okay," she said. "This time, it feels like the flight is taking off without weight on my shoulders." The plane began to taxi down the runway, engines humming beneath them like a promise, and as it lifted into the sky, Ebony gazed out the window, not just at clouds, but at possibilities. The old chapter had closed. This one, it was hers to write. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey of resilience, justice, and transformation. Ebony's story reminds us that sometimes we're forced to stand our ground against prejudice, even when all we want is to go about our lives in peace. Yet through unwavering determination and community support, she turned a moment of injustice into an opportunity to uplift thousands of young minds. If this story moved you, consider how each of us can play a part in creating a world where kindness and equality triumph. Spread the word, like this video, share it with friends who need inspiration, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that champion courage, empathy, and the power of standing up for what's right. Together, we can shine a spotlight on injustice, spark conversations that matter, and move closer to a future defined by respect and opportunity for all.